So, regarding the Ethiopian Bible, the mistake that a lot of biblical scholars make is that they start looking at the Ethiopian Bible by being dismissive. That's how they start. They begin with having a minimalistic approach because I suspect of the geography, first and foremost, because they think that Ethiopia is located in Africa, but what they don't seem to pay attention to is that Ethiopia is in Northeast Africa. The word Ethiopia is mentioned over, I believe, 40 times in the Bible to begin with. And that's because the ancient Israelites in the Levant, the Middle East, interacted with the ancient Ethiopians. War was one of the reasons, and Ethiopia is quite relevant, especially in the Old Testament, but then in the New Testament as well, because the Ethiopian eunuch is mentioned in the book of Acts, and we'll get back to that. But first and foremost, Ethiopia, especially the region of modern Ethiopia, used to share a kingdom with Saudi Arabia. So Yemen, in the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, and Ethiopia used to be under the same kingdom, the Sabaeans, or the Sabaean kingdom. And that used to be the country of the Queen of Sheba. And the Queen of Sheba is mentioned in the Old Testament as the Queen of the South. She travels to ancient Israel during the First Temple period, and she meets with King Solomon. And because of this, there's an entire tradition in Ethiopia, or in the history of Ethiopia, that the Queen of Sheba bore a son from King Solomon named Ebna Melech, or Menelik I, which means the son of the king, or Ibn al-Hakim in Arabic, which means the son of the wise man, right? And then there's an entire dynasty in Ethiopia that used to be known as the Solomonic dynasty, which claimed direct descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. And according to Ethiopian history, that lasted from 1000 BC, or circa 900 to 1000 BC, all the way until 1974, when the monarchy was abolished in Ethiopia. So a history of 3,000 years that's directly connected to ancient Israel. But what's interesting is that now there's genetic evidence, DNA, hard science, evidence that there was a migration from the Levant to Ethiopia, a gene flow or gene migration of ancient Semitic people from the Levant to Ethiopia 3,000 years ago. And this genetic evidence supports the tradition of the Ethiopians. Also, because Ethiopia and Yemen used to be part of the same kingdom, and that region is the founder of ancient Arabian or Middle Eastern civilization, pre-Islamic Middle Eastern civilization, Ethiopia is heavily Semitic. The language, Amharic, which served as the official language of Ethiopia for centuries, is a Semitic language. In fact, it's the second most spoken Semitic language after Arabic. The ancient classical Ethiopian language, known as Ethiopic or Ge'ez, is also a Semitic language, and there are 7 or more Semitic languages in Ethiopia that are indigenous to Ethiopia. So the civilization of Ethiopia is heavily Semitic, and the Ethiopians have also preserved ancient Jewish practices, such as the procession of the Ark of the Covenant. According to tradition, the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia, for example, and has been in Ethiopia for thousands of years now. That's according to tradition, but there are traces of it in terms of tradition, in terms of worship, because in every Ethiopian Orthodox church, there's a replica of the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark, or the cult of the Ark of the Covenant, is central to the biblical traditions of Ethiopia and its Judeo-Christian culture and worship or spirituality. So this by itself tells us that there's a connection, a profound connection between Ethiopia and ancient Israel, or the events in the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. The other thing is that Ethiopia converted to Christianity in the 4th century, around the year 320 AD. That's before the conversion of Rome. So Ethiopia was declared a Christian empire before the Roman Empire. And the mistake that biblical scholars, for example, we have Wesley Huff, who talked about the Ethiopian Bible and the Ethiopian Christian tradition. The mistake that they make, they say that the Ethiopians were introduced to the Bible in the 4th century and that missionaries from Syria came with all these scriptures and gave them to the Ethiopians. And the Ethiopians, according to personages such as Wesley Huff, just accepted all these documents as canon. They say that the Ethiopians were non-discretionary and accepted all the documents, all the texts, as canon, and that's the reason that the Ethiopian Bible has 81 books in it. But that's not true. Why? Because first of all, there's no evidence that Frumentius and one other person from the Lebanon region, they were Phoenicians, who went down to Ethiopia from the north. They were actually shipwrecked. They were caught by officials from the Aksumite Empire, and they were enslaved. The Ethiopian king or emperor at the time, whose name was Ezana, actually freed them from slavery, and Frumentius actually became an advisor to the emperor, and then later he converted the emperor to Christianity, after which the emperor declared the entire empire as a Christian state. Frumentius was promoted to bishop of Ethiopia. But although Ethiopia was declared a Christian empire in the 4th century, Christianity had already entered the kingdom. Because the Ethiopian eunuch mentioned in the book of Acts was converted to Christianity by Saint Philip. And the Ethiopian eunuch was reading the book of Isaiah and was traveling to Jerusalem, to the temple, to worship. Why? Because he was Jewish. Now, there's evidence that the Ethiopian Empire was at least partly Jewish up until the time of the conversion to Christianity. Why? Because, like we mentioned, since the times or days of the Queen of Sheba, the traditions of the ancient Jews or the ancient Israelites entered into that region. According to the rabbis of Israel, during or around the time of the siege of Jerusalem, there was a war between the king of Cush, ancient Ethiopia. The king was known as Taharka or Tirhaka. There was a war between the ancient Israelites and the king of Cush or ancient Ethiopia. So according to the rabbinic accounts, about 130,000 ancient Israelites went all the way to Ethiopia to go to war against the king of Cush, Tirhaka, and they were lost in the mountains of darkness, which are believed to be the Semin Mountains in modern-day Ethiopia. So ancient Israelite and Jewish presence in Ethiopia dates back to the First Temple period. And these traditions and beliefs in Ethiopia and in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that are heavily and profoundly Jewish date back to that time. So the Ethiopians had the ancient Hebrew scriptures before Christianity, because these practices are there. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, even today, is heavily Jewish in its practice. It has preserved ancient Israelite or Jewish observances of the Old Testament, but also incorporated ancient Orthodox Christian beliefs and fused the religion of Christianity with the ancient Jewish practices of the First Temple period. So the Ethiopian eunuch is quite important for this discussion because there's the evidence that Ethiopians had the scriptures of the Old Testament because the Ethiopian eunuch was reading the book of Isaiah. He went to Jerusalem to worship. He was practicing Judaism as a Jew and was reading the book of Isaiah, which is part of the Old Testament. So this is proof or evidence that the ancient Ethiopians, prior to converting to Christianity in the first century, had the Old Testament scriptures. But on top of that, the Ethiopian Bible has 81 books. Now, the Catholic Bible has 73 books, and the Eastern Orthodox Bible has about 76 books. And the Ethiopian Bible has 4 or 5 more books. And among these, there's the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. And these are ancient Jewish scripture. These are not some random texts. And the Book of Enoch is quoted by Jude in the New Testament. He quotes the Book of Enoch, chapter 1, verse 9, word to word. And he says that Enoch said this. So according to Jude, the Book of Enoch is legitimate scripture. There's no debating that, because Jude, when quoting the Book of Enoch, he's quoting a prophecy about the future that Enoch has prophesied in the Book of Enoch. So this prophecy is obviously inspired. So if that prophecy is inspired, and that's the prophecy of Enoch, and the legitimacy is ascertained by Jude quoting out of this book, quoting a prophecy, this should be evident to anyone that the Book of Enoch was understood to be inspired by the first Christians. And the Book of Jubilees actually gives us additional context about the contents of the Book of Enoch. It is a profoundly important work, and it's considered canon in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and is found right before the Book of Enoch in the Old Testament. In fact, the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch are to be read together in order to have a full and comprehensive understanding of the contents of the Book of Enoch. So the fact that the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch, which are only found in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and are ancient Jewish scripture, have only been preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, these scriptures should be approached with great caution and great care without being dismissive, because the Ethiopian tradition and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church contain practices, traditions, and scripture that are very ancient and that date to the First Temple period and to the times of the ancient Israelites before the times of Jesus of Nazareth. The Essenes, a Jewish sect, a monastic order of Jews during the times of Jesus, also preserved the Book of Enoch. And this should also tell us that the Book of Enoch was a very important document for the Jews of the first century and prior. Modern Old Testament scholars dismiss the Book of Enoch and the Ethiopian Bible because the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees are not included in the Masoretic text. But this is a wrong approach. Giving the Masoretic text a superior authority is unfounded. The Septuagint, for example, contains additional books. The Catholic Church, for example, accepts all the Septuagint documents or scripture. And we know that the documents of the Septuagint were in use during the days of Jesus. But additionally, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees and a few other texts. And this should by no means be dismissed simply because we assume that the Masoretic text is more authoritative or superior. If you have any interest in theistic philosophy and ancient Judeo-Christian or Jewish Christian metaphysics and mystical theology, I invite you to read my book entitled Reason and the Sacred and Ethiopian Metaphysics. Thank you, and may God be with you.